A liberal senator was looking at the dead streetcars, or was that on the following day, and his memory failed him. Some of them with broken windows, some tipped over, one tipped over the tracks, and was recalling the July days of 1914 on the eve of the war. It seemed that the old attempt was being renewed. The senator's eyes did not receive him. The continuity is clear. History was picking up the ends of the revolutionary threads, broken by the war, and tying them in a knot. Throughout the entire day, crowds of people poured from one part of the city to another. They were persistently dispelled by the police, stopped and crowded back by cavalry detachments and occasionally by infantry, along with shouts of "Down with the police" was heard oftener and oftener a hurrah addressed to the Cossacks. That was significant. Toward the police, the crowd showed ferocious hatred. They routed the mounted police with whistles, stones, and pieces of ice. In a totally indifferent way, the workers approached the soldiers. Around the barracks, sentinels, patrols, and lines of soldiers stood groups of working men and women exchanging friendly words with the army men. This was a new stage due to the growth of the strike and the personal meeting of the worker with the army. Such a stage is inevitable in every revolution, but it always seems new, and does in fact occur differently every time. Those who have read and written about it do not recognize the things when they see it. In the State Duma, that they were telling how an enormous mass of people had flowed Znamensky Square and all Nevsky Prospect and the adjoining streets, and that a totally unprecedented phenomenon was observed. The Cossacks and the regiments with bands were being greeted by revolutionary and not patriotic crowds with the shouts of "Hurrah!" to the question, what does it all mean? The first person accosted in the crowd answered the deputy. A policeman struck a woman with a knout. The Cossacks stepped in and drove away the police. Whether it happened in this way or another will never be verified, but the crowd believed that it was so, that this was possible. The relief had not fallen out of the sky. It arose from previous experience and was therefore to become an earnest of victory. The workers at the Ericsson, one of the foremost mills in the Vyborg district, after a morning meeting came out on the Samsonievsky Prospect, a whole mass, 20,500 of them, and in a narrow place ran into the Cossacks, cutting their way with the breasts of their horses. The officers first charged through the crowd. Behind them, feeling the whole weight of the prospect, galloped the Cossacks. Decisive moment, but the horsemen cautiously, in a long rebound, rode through the corridor just made by the officers. Some of them smiled. Kairov recalls, and one of them gave the workers a good wink. This wink was not without meaning. The workers were emboldened with a friendly, not hostile kind of assurance, and slightly infected the Cossacks with it. The one who winked found imitators. In spite of renewed efforts from the officers, the Cossacks, without openly breaking this discipline, failed to force the crowd to disperse, but flowed through it in streams. This was repeated 3 or 4 times and brought the two sides even closer together. Individual Cossacks began to reply to the workers' questions and even to enter into momentary conversations with them. Of discipline there remained but a thin transparent shell that threatened to break through any second. The officers hastened to separate their patrol from the workers, and abandoning the idea of dispersing them, lined the Cossacks out across the street as a barrier to prevent the demonstrators from getting to the center. But even this did not help. Standing stock still in perfect discipline, the Cossacks did not hinder the workers from dividing under their horses. The revolution does not choose its paths. It made its first steps toward victory under the belly of a Cossack's horse, a remarkable incident, and remarkable the eye of its narrator an eye which took an impression of every bend in the process. No wonder, for the narrator was a leader. He was at the head of over 2,000 men, the eye of a commander watching for enemy whips and bullets looked sharp. It seems that the break in the army first appeared among the Cossacks, those age-old subduers and punishers. This does not mean, however, that the Cossacks were more revolutionary than others. On the contrary, these solid property owners, riding their own horses, highly valuing their Cossacks' peculiarities, scorning the plain peasants, mistrustful of the workers, had many elements of conservatism. But just for this reason, the changes caused by the war were more sharply noticeable in them. Besides, they were always being pulled around, sent everywhere, driven against the people, kept in suspense, and they were the first to be put to the test. They were sick of it and wanted to go home. Therefore they winked, "Do it, boys, if you know how we won't bother you." All these things, however, were merely very significant symptoms. The army was still the army. It was bound with this discipline, and the threats were in the hands of the monarchy. The worker mass was unarmed. The leaders had not yet thought of the decisive crisis. On the calendar of the Council of Ministers that day there stood, among other questions, the question of disorders in the capital, strikes, demonstrations. This isn't the first time. Everything is provided for. Directions have been issued. Return to the order of business. And what were the direction? and what were the directions? In spite of the fact that on the 23rd and 24th, 28 policemen were beaten up, persuasive exactness about the number, the military commander of the district, General Kabalov, almost a dictator, did not resort to shooting. Not from kind-heartedness. Everything was provided for and marked down in advance, even the time for the shooting. The revolution caught them unawares, only with regard to the exact moment. Generally speaking, both sides, the revolutionary and the governmental, were carefully preparing for it. Had been preparing for years, had always been preparing. As for the Bolsheviks, all their activity since 1905 was nothing but preparation for a second revolution, and the activities of the government, an enormous share of them, were preparations to put down the new revolution. In the fall of 1916, this part of the government's work has assumed an aspect of particularly careful planning. A commission under Kabalov's chairmanship had completed by the middle of January 1917 a very exact plan for crushing a new insurrection. The city was divided into 6 police districts, which in turn were subdivided into rayons. The commander of the reserve guard units, General Shebekian, was placed at the head of all the armed forces. Regiments were assigned to different rayons. In each of the 6 police districts, the police, the guardmen, the gendarmes, and the troops were united under the command of special staff officers. The Cossacks' cavalry was at the disposal of Shebekin himself for larger scale operations. The order of action was planned as follows. First, the police act alone. Then the Cossacks appears on the scene with whips. And only in case of real necessity the troops go into action with rifles and machine guns. It was this very plan developed out of the experience of 1905 that was put into operation in February days. The difficulty lay not in lack of foresight, nor defects of the plan itself, but in the human material. Here the whole thing threatened to hand fire. Formerly the plan was based on the entire garrison, which comprised 150,000 soldiers, but in reality only some 10,000 came into the count. Besides the policemen numbering 3,500, a firm hope was placed in the military training schools. This is explained by the makeup of the Petrograd garrison, which at the time consisted almost exclusively of reserve units, primarily of the 14 reserve battalions attached to the regiment of the guard, which were then at the front. In addition to that, the garrison comprised 1 reserve infantry regiment, a reserve bicycle battalion, a reserve armored car division, small units of sappers and artillerymen, and 2 regiments of Don Cossacks. That was a great many, it was too many. The Slowen reserve units were made up of a human mass which has either escaped training almost entirely or succeeded in getting free of it. But for that matter, substantially the same thing was true of the entire army. Kabalov meticulously adhered to the plan he had worked out. On the first day, the 23rd, the police operated alone. On the 24th, for the most part, the cavalry has led into the streets, but only to work with whip and lance. The use of infantry and firearms has to depend on the further development of events, but events came thick and fast. On the 25th, the strike spread wider. According to the government's figures, 240,000 workers participated that day. The most backward layers are following up the vanguard. Already a good number of small establishments are on strike. The streetcars are at the stand. Business concerns are closed. In the course of the day, the students of the higher schools joined the strike. By noon, tens of thousands of people poured to the Kazan Cathedral and the surrounding streets. Attempts are made to organize street meetings. A series of armed encounters with the police occurs. Orators address the crowds around Alexander III monument. The mounted police open fire. A speaker falls wounded. Shots from the crowd kill a police inspector, wound the chief of police and several other policemen. Bottles, petards, and hand grenades are thrown at the gendarmes. The war has taught this art. The soldiers show indifference, at times hostility to the police. It spreads excitedly through the crowd that when the police opened fire by Alexander III monument, the Cossack let go a volley at the horse pharaohs. Such was the nickname of the police, and the latter had to gallop off. This apparently had not a legend circulated for self-encouragement, since the incident, although in different versions, is confirmed from several sources. A worker Bolshevik, Kayurov, one of the authentic leaders in those days, relates how at one place within sight of a detachment of Cossacks, the demonstrators scattered under the whips of the mounted police, and how he, Kayurov, and several workers with him, instead of following the fugitives, took off their caps and approached the Cossacks with the words, "Brother Cossacks, help the workers in a struggle for their peaceable demands. You see how the pharaohs treat us, hungry workers, help us." This consciously humble manner, those caps in their hands, were an accurate psychological calculation, inimitable gesture. The whole history of street fights and revolutionary victories swarms with such improvisations, but they are drowned without a trace in the abyss of great events. The shell remains to historian, this generalization. The Cossacks glanced at each other in some special way. Kayurov later, near the station gate, the crowd were tossing in their arms a Cossacks continues, and we were hardly out of the way before they rushed into the fight, and a few minutes who before their eyes has slaughtered a police inspector with his saber. Soon the police disappear altogether. That is the beginning to act secretly. Then the soldiers appear, bayonets lowered. Anxiously the workers ask them, "Comrades, you haven't come to help the police?" A rude move along for answer. Another attempt ends the same way. The soldiers are sullen. A worm is gnawing them, and they cannot stand it, and they cannot stand it when a question hits the very center of the pain.